Islands. If they were to start on Isle of Palms first because of all that work that still needs to happen, it would just delay this.
Somebody can explain why they got their sand and our sand. Is there different quality or different type of sand or sediment that we?
Yeah, the area that they had designated for Sullivan's has a little bit coarser sand grain size. And their thought is that that sand would hold on that shoreline a little better because it's so exposed to the currents of Breach Inlet, that they wanted to use that for Sullivan's, thinking it would perform better over there. Finer sand at Isle of Palms has a better chance of staying within the beach system, moving up the profile and into the dunes over time, because it's not exposed to those currents.
Makes sense. And one last thing, just a request. The last, I think, presentation that we have on the Isle of Palms website is from 1/23/24 from the Army Corps, and it was a pretty good 8-page PowerPoint that sort of showed schedule, volume, duration, where they were going to pick the sand up from and where they were going to put it along the breach to the 10th. Would it be possible to maybe update that schedule, because it shows that the construction was March to August? But that will give everybody an idea of, if we're out 4 to 6 weeks on cleaning the sand and then they start at the end of September, I think it would help all of us to stay in lockstep as to when's it going to start, where's it going to go, and how long is it going to last. And because it sounds like this is going to probably, the presentation indicated that it's 1 to 2 months at Sullivan's and then 4 months for Isle of Palms, which I think puts us from in like an October, November, December, January kind of a time frame. I just think that if we keep updating that, either whether it's monthly or whatever, just to keep everybody apprised of where their part of the beach is going to get impacted, I think that might be helpful.
So, yes, and we have requested to OCRM to provide us an updated construction schedule. We haven't received anything. All of those documents are.
Army Corps.
I'm sorry, the Army Corps of Engineers. Hopefully with this concurrent, recurrent meeting schedule, we can get a little bit more information from them. But we've shared everything we've received from them. We continue to ask for updates regularly, and what you have is what we have received. And I think that what I have been consistently saying is how important it is for us to communicate with the public and with the community, particularly the area on Breach Inlet that are going to be impacted, because we get questions all the time about the schedule, about the impacts, and we feel in some perspective unable to answer those questions because we don't have the information. So we will continue to express that to the Corps, and hopefully we can have an improved communication.
And then the shoal project.
The shoal management permit, that has been submitted, Stephen, correct?
Yes.
To the regulatory agency. So at the last meeting, I reported that we changed our strategy on the shoal management permit for the north end, rather than including the 2 harvest areas, one for the shoal and the other one for sand recycling, that we were separating the 2. So the one for the shoal has been submitted, and we hope that process to be, that permit application to be considered quickly, so that hopefully we can have a project early next year on that end.
And will that be posted? I think the last one out there on our site is from April. Is that are we going to post the new permit out there?
The public notice, I do not believe has been
Sent out yet?
sent out
Okay.
just yet. Last week we spoke with OCRM. We kind of restated our urgency to try to get some of these things out. They're trying to get it out as quickly as possible.
Great.
We're also working on our permit for the rehandling project.
Shoal's getting close, for sure. You can see it at low tide. Desiree, Stephen, anything
No.
else? On the shoal?
On the shoal management?
No, I don't think anything on that, other than we'll have to work on the survey to get the data to see exactly where that at, what the volumes are, when that gets pushed through. So sandbags, I'm waiting to hear back from Collins on those other ones. They were having issues with the sewing machine. They did get the new sewing machine. I believe those were filled over the weekend, and they were supposed to be installed this week up at the east end, another 100 bags. I'm waiting for confirmation that that's actually coming through. But hopefully those will get in place this week.
So two more updates. I know at the last meeting, we had talked about the city pursuing a couple of sort of short-term, long-term permits, knowing that this Army Corps of Engineers project is now delayed until the end of September. So what we talked about was, one, try to get from OCRM, which is now the Bureau of Coastal Management, so we need to get used to a new acronym, is to see whether or not that entire area could be designated as an emergency area that would give us some flexibility to harvest some sand from areas within that emergency area, rather than what currently the regulations stipulate, that you can only scrape right along the property line of the property that you're scraping. We had a call with OCRM early last week, and on Tuesday, I believe, and there doesn't seem to be that approach is not feasible from a regulatory perspective. We also discussed the new changes to the language of the regulations that require the placement of sand or any emergency condition to be right when the property is at 20 feet. Stephen reported last time at our last meeting about some changes to that language that gives the department a little bit more discretion and flexibility to address areas that are in critical condition, but maybe not at 20, but really getting close to that 20-foot threshold. They did indicate that that would need to be a decision on a case-by-case basis by the department. We did show them images and the current state at Breach Inlet, and Stephen had identified after our meeting, he did do a drone assessment and have some up-to-date pictures of the current conditions as of last Friday. Obviously, that changes every day. We believe that OCRM would be agreeable to grant approval or permission, if you will, for the placement of sandbags in the 200 block, and about two to three other properties that are not right at 20 feet, but are really close to this erosional area. And that would need to be submitted and presented to them in the form of an emergency order request. Do you want to expand on that in terms of the areas and the conditions that you observed when you did the assessment last week?
Yeah, again, the erosional arc really was bracketed by this 200 block, so 2nd Avenue to 3rd Avenue access. A couple of houses, 130 and 132, just south of the 2nd Avenue access, have at least the tide line was further out, it's about 35 feet or so, but there was old dune escarpment and vegetation showing where previous tides had gotten fairly close to the houses. And that's kind of in that area where if you're building a continuous kind of protective wall, you would go to the BCM? No?
BCM, yes.
And say, hey, this makes sense to do it here. I think we had a pretty bad high tide last night, so that area may be expanded. I think the biggest thing that came out of that meeting, though, is we had talked a little bit about whether it's a city initiative to do these bags, whether the city could kind of try to team with the individual owners. It really seems like it needs to be either an all or nothing effort. Either the city needs to do it and be responsible for it, or individual owners need to be responsible for it. And that's due to, the permitting and who's responsible for the bond. There's also some liability that if the city has a permit and it's an individual owner does something outside of that permit, that liability falls on the city. And that could even translate into construction liability and personal injury and things like that. And just from a management standpoint from the state, they really kind of felt like, they want to support the owners in the city however way they can, but the idea that the city has a permit and then individuals can kind of piece by piece utilize that was really not a great way to try to approach it.
Correct. So that we had talked about whether the city pursued the permit, held the bond, and then allowed each individual owner to hire a contractor, install the bags. But that just, the more we talked about it with the state amongst ourselves, it just seems like potentially a problematic situation for the city that would expose the city to liability if it's not done the right way. So we're looking at either individual property owners request their own permit, emergency permit, they pay for their bond, they get a contractor, the contractor performs the work according to the permit, or the city doing all that ourselves.
Do we have an ID? You did the drone.
Could
Oh,
you-
I'm so sorry. I'm so bad.
Hello there. No, what, when you did the drone, just as how many homes fit into the 20-foot, what you just said, but then as we all know, like last night, I know at least 130, the house to my left would now be, yeah, last night did some serious damage, so it's come up, and we are right on the, but how many homes fit into that 20-foot kind of? And then how many people did you see as you looked at the, I really, and say the 30-foot? Like, because it's, I think we're still going to see some erosion in the next couple days that might put even more people at danger, or homes. But this is,
Yeah.
they're unprotected.
Yeah, so there are 9 properties, including one
Okay.
empty lot between Second and Third Avenue.
Okay.
There are 3 properties north of Third Avenue where the pools are pretty far out, that as of last week were in that marginal area, so those could probably also be included. And then 2 properties south of Second Avenue, the 130 and 132, I believe. So you add those other 5, and you're, somewhere around a dozen to 15 properties.
That are in that critical sandbag. Okay.
And that was Friday.
That was as of the 12th, so that was 10 days ago.
Week and a half, yeah.
And then what about again, I just don't know, when we look at Breach Inlet and what's going on there, it's, as we look at the tip of it, where we're seeing serious erosion, yet maybe they're not in the 20, or are they? Because
Yeah, they.
that's just a question. I just
Yeah.
don't know as we look at homes that are really at serious imminent risk.
Yeah, so the area south of Second Avenue has really gained a ton of sand the past several months, and there's on kind of a recurve spit, a new spit reforming there. Again, this was on the 12th. Obviously, the tide had got back up into the dunes last night, but seeing it at a low tide, you would really be able to see the sand that's still in that system. So overall, it's been pretty favorable there. The properties immediately adjacent to the access at the bridge, 1 or 2 properties there, still have a fresh dune escarpment. Haven't seen any recovery of the dry sand beach right there, but there's a lot of sand that is moving around that corner right now.
Okay, and I think I didn't see it, I did see it last night. So last night, not at high tide, the water was up to that escarpment and eating at it again at that very tip. And I just bring, those homes look like they're starting to fall into at least 1 or 2 of them.
Yeah, and like Desiree said, it changes every day,
Yeah.
so we have to,
Yeah,
we want to be as proactive as necessary. Unfortunately, I just don't have any confidence in schedules right now with this core project. that,
Right.
you
No,
know,
again, there's-
So, I don't want to overreact to things, but knowing that we are approaching in hurricane season now, but really getting closer to the peak of it, I don't think it's unwise to, try to protect as many properties that have been vulnerable or are going to, have that
so does
potential.
it sound like with south, is it more, on the south end, would you say 15 is a rough estimate?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good estimate. I'd like to look at it again
Okay.
today when the lightning goes away and.
No, understandable.
yeah,
I'm
tide
just,
goes down, but
again,
yeah.
just as I
I
said,
think
as
that's
we
a-
look at whether it's something that the city or individuals done, clearly cost would be an issue. So it'd be 15 lots times the cost per lot.
The estimate we worked on last week, Stephen, were we looking at about 400,000, 450 for that entire area?
Yeah, I think based off of a 100-foot lot, which I'm not sure what the lots are exactly right there, but somewhere around 30,000 per lot, that 100-foot lot is a good ballpark. Maybe another 25% plus or minus on that. but-
And that includes the bond
No, that
or
would just be
whatever.
construction.
Okay.
Yeah,
And then
but
there's
the
That's
the-
bond
in
would
and
be-
out?
That would just be in.
That's just in.
Yeah, out should be a tenth of that, I would
Okay.
think, but
And that's the newer bags.
yes.
Correct.
I know it's a silly question, but just to make sure I'm correct on it, in order for it to be effective, the wall, you need to have every single home along that wall built with sandbags, is that right?
That's the ideal scenario, sure. If somebody doesn't want to participate, it doesn't mean that the wall won't be effective to the adjacent properties. It just will be less effective during a storm. You have potential for, collapse of one section, and potential more damage. So it does make sense to have a continuous wall.
So if it were roughly $500,000 with the in and out, and then I think we had talked a little bit about, would we have some savings by not scraping?
Yeah, I think you'd have a little bit of savings. You wouldn't scrape once the bags were installed.
I was running, what, 20 a month, you said, I think?
Correct.
And then just on a permitting, so on if continuous is great, so if you're now the edge, so you're 134, 136, 130, whatever I'm going the wrong way, but whatever the edge is, are those people permitted, let's say the city took on what that permit was, would those people be permitted by BCM to be able to do their own sandbags? Or is this limitation is only an emergency?
Only when the emergency condition applied, or
So-
they could justify it, through their.
On a case by case.
So in that standpoint, not to be, I love good cost analysis where we can take away, but we still may need to have the bulldozer on standby because 20 feet versus 35 isn't that big when it comes to if we get a tropical storm. So,
And the other option for a similar cost, you could truck in somewhere along 10,000 yards of sand, which sounds like a lot, but I don't think is, a lot to handle the kind of erosion along that area that we are continuing to see.
Realistically, from an implementation standpoint, if the city were to take this on and do that 15-home stretch, what would the timing be, say, if we made a decision quickly, what would the timing be to do the implementation, assume we get the BCM approval, versus potential realistic outcome if we say, let the residents do it?
I mean, I think best case scenario right now, if somebody had to make an order for multiple hundreds of bags, you're looking at bare minimum 2 weeks to get bags starting to be installed.
No, I think
just from the
that's-
delivery time.
I think
and
that's
stuff.
aggressive.
And that would be
Yeah.
best case. I think more realistically, 3 to 4 weeks to start getting bags installed.
But would the project, is just hypothetically, would it be installed realistically? Could it be done by mid-August, end of August? End of August, I would say.
I think so.
Yeah, again, Stephen, just to manage expectations, I think that's the best case. We've been waiting on 100 bags at Beechwood East for almost a month.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we need to paint the real picture on what's been happening here with these bags and this contractor. I mean, they're not like the white ones that are just plentiful sitting
Yeah.
around. It's just been a slow process to get these things done.
Yeah, and I think the fact that they're either filling them last weekend, which I hope it was the case, or filling them this week, you have, if it was that contractor, which I'm not suggesting use the same contractor, but things are kind of mobilized to make it a little bit faster, but you still have to have those bags ordered. And I mentioned to the mayor, I think last week, whether it was a good idea at some point for the city just to purchase sandbags so that they're kind of in stock in a warehouse that the city owns and then can distribute, so there's not a 2-week, manufacturing labor. And that might not be the case. Maybe there are bags available, but I don't think so. You have to talk with the manufacturer.
so with Beechwood East, when, and I apologize when do you anticipate that they'll be finished?
They should be finished this week.
Okay, so if we were to be able to move forward, then perhaps they'll be available to start working on more bags.
Yes, they wouldn't have to return the equipment and demobilize the crews and things like that, but.
So I think, Scott, back to your question, I think end of August is absolute best case based on historical.
And maybe I missed it, but how long is the permitting part of that going to be?
The permitting for that is very quick, within a day or two usually
Okay.
for an emergency condition. It's different than a general.
And we
permit.
can issue our own order for those that are within 20 feet. We don't have the discretionary language that the Bureau of Coastal Management has to address some of the areas that are close but not quite, and they would have to use their judgment to authorize that area.
That helps with the timing also, yeah, okay.
Can I ask a question in reference to the sandbags in the Army Corps project? Sandbags, as I understand it, have to be removed before the Army Corps. So if, let's say we put sandbags in August, right, and then to September, we're trying to pump sand, the removal of sandbags could delay or have an impact on the other project?
Yeah,
Yes or no?
It wouldn't delay the project. Your OCRM works with you to allow removal in connection with the project.
So they
it
can-
can be done
At the
as
same
they're
time.
pumping or right after they pump.
Okay.
And I think they were going to deploy in 9th and 8th, and I mean, they were going to start closer to the pier. The sandbags would be up at the 200 block.
I'm just,
Sounds like
That's a
we're
good
almost,
question. Yeah.
we'd be out of hurricane season almost by the time it happens anyhow.
You mean the Army Corps?
Really, it's an insurance policy, but the fact that the scraping is not helping, I mean, it's sustaining, you know, again, it's not the best option, but it's the only option that we have right now. It may provide some better protection for that. But just with that erosional situation right now, it's just going to kind of continue to be a bear until it decides it doesn't want to do that anymore.
Well, and the cost of scraping, I mean, if right now we're scraping on 4 or 5 properties, if that continues to expand, the cost of doing that operation goes up. They would need more equipment, more crew. So you just have to weigh the cost of both options and what has the best chance at holding the line between now and when the core project starts.
So, just, this information is so helpful. What, so to pull a trigger to make a decision on the sandbags, does there need to be something formalized for the meeting tomorrow, a request, or what needs to happen to actually, does it need to be put on tomorrow's? I just don't want a council, it sounds
It's
like
on
just
the
what you
agenda.
said. Okay, that's, again, I'm not privy to everything,
Yeah.
much, honestly.
Yeah.
Just,
So the council agenda for tomorrow evening there's 2 items that relate to the situation. One is the emergency ordinance that council considered back in April. It was no decision at that time was made. And that emergency ordinance would allow property owners within that stretch between Breach Inlet and 9th to construct a revetment or a seawall under certain conditions. And those conditions included within 20 feet of the structure. The original ordinance required a certification from an engineer. That has been eliminated and then swapped with a requirement for a hold harmless agreement from the owner protecting the city in the event if the revetment or the seawall causes damage to any downdrift lot. So that's on the agenda for consideration tomorrow. If approved, that is good for 60 days. Then there, under old business, we have an item to consider the emergency conditions down at Breach Inlet and consideration of options. So these options will be discussed and then council could make a decision and allocate funds if it decides to cover the cost of scraping or scraping we have been doing, but for the placement of sandbags.
perfect, thank you.
So I
That
think,
helps.
I
Yeah.
think it's teed up.
Teed
for
up, that's all I
tomorrow.
wanted to
Yeah.
make sure of, is that we didn't,
And
it's just scary.
I'll just add the last little bit of info that I do, Aetna, the contractor for the Corps, did send over to Sullivan's a schedule that is already behind, but it's there. But the only thing for that, it does show them using or placing material at the south end first and then working toward the north. So they would be placing material according to the schedule, which again is guaranteed to change. They may work from south to north, so if that, modifies your thoughts on anything, just want to be aware.
So we wouldn't need to remove sandbags or property owners if they do it themselves before they can start that project. They would
Right,
be
it'd
able.
be 2 separate things, especially with the core project. Like at the east end, when we had the sandbags, they actually allowed us to pump sand around them and then come back and remove them, because they want the properties protected. They don't
Protected
want-
during the period, right?
Yeah.
Good. So we'll know tomorrow, I mean, council will have an opportunity to hear about, our current conditions, the options, and once we have a path, we will be communicating that to owners and letting them know what the plan is.
Is Steve going to be there?
What time is that meeting?
It's 6.
At 6. I think I can be, but I have a 7:30 meeting with some folks down at Edisto that I'd have to be out by 7:30, or at least in another room by 7:30, if I can do that.
We can do,
I think would be helpful. if
Rearrange the
he's there.
agenda.
it's the first thing on the agenda,
But the emergency ordinance is much later,
correct.
yeah. So,
We could do
Yeah.
we could rearrange
okay.
that.
Or at least maybe the drone, whatever you could present.
Yes.
All right, good. updates? Douglas? You good? You're getting ready to jump in here, though. So our next item, discussion of developing long and midterm beach preservation strategies, review minimum healthy beach profile, triggers for action, and goals for future beach conditions and projects. You've had a draft in front of you for a couple of weeks at least, just on what we've been hitting on for the last 6 or 7 months around erosion rates and healthy beach profile and minimums and maximums and such. Douglas, you want to walk through this some?
Yeah, so I think I would just say that we have, our hope is to kind of take this bullet point list and develop them into more of a report that's the ultimate product of this group. The first 7, I think we've kind of, we've talked a lot about those first 7. I don't know if there's any comments on those or if we're ready to get into the last 4.
We just kind of review them just to, just go over them again for us and for the public, just so that we're all on the same page.
Because these will obviously drive very
Yeah.
hard the financial
Yeah.
piece of
Yeah.
this, so they're pretty critical.
And most of these are covered in the CSE scenario that's behind it in the packet. But there's figure 5. That's the minimum what are we calling it?
We're looking at three.
Minimum healthy beach volume.
So I think the objective here was 380 cubic yards per foot in the middle sections, and then 600 cubic yards per foot at the inlets because of the
Correct.
quicker erosion, and we're going to need to build up a healthier beach for it to sustain the longer 8-year cycles. Is that kind of?
Yeah, I think the peak at one station is 600 feet, so it's not a immediate jump to a 600 foot, but there's, that's correctly stated. And again, it's a guideline that should be a target to consider. It's not a fast number that, is the end all. But I think it definitely makes sense from everything. The way I've looked at the data in a lot of different ways, it seems like the numbers on the chart match what the real world beach condition looks like, which is really what people are, looking at.
And I'll say the next 3, number 2, 3, and 4, are, to the mayor's point, really what drive the entire budget and kind of really the program. And those are the expected erosion rates for the north end. We've agreed to 150,000 cubic yards per year of loss on that end, and expected erosion rate on the south end of 70,000 cubic yards of loss per year, and then a cadence between projects of adding that amount of sand every 8 years. Those, as you all know, kind of dictate a budgetary requirement of what we'd need to have ready for these projects every 8 years, and that's going to be the bulk of what we talk about with number 8 below.
And again, on these, the erosion rates were based on historical, sort of, kind of, and I would just like to add, I thought, I hope that we revisit or reconfirm these sort of on an annual basis because of the acceleration that we've seen over the last couple of years to make
Yeah,
sure that
that-
these hold firm, because if these start moving, I think to Philip's point, this then hits, it ripples all the way through our assumptions.
Yeah, it should be a living document that's based off of updated monitoring
Yeah.
efforts. So the east end erosion rate was looking at the erosion rate between the 2008 and 2018 project, and then looking at the erosion rate since 2018, but also trying to account for the fact that we are about to gain a lot of sand from an attaching shoal that will improve those rates, but, yeah, so it's a realistic, fairly conservative estimate of the loss.
Yeah, and to that end, Scott, the fifth bullet is that we plan to use the beach monitoring surveys as kind of a benchmark, is how are we doing in terms of, our goals, our forecasts. And ultimately, if we see a trigger arise from one of these surveys, that would trigger the city staff to come to city council and kind of wave the flag and say, hey, this is, as a result of these surveys and the triggers established and recommended by this group, we think we could have an issue, bring a decision point to city council, but also it will tell us along the way, are these expectations of erosion rates holding true? So because those beach monitoring surveys become so important, one of the recommendations is to go from, and this is number 5, to go from annual to semi-annual. Talked about just doing it at the inlets because they're the most dynamic, they're the most dynamic parts of the beach. I think in talking with Stephen, the bulk of the work is at the inlets. I mean, that's the complex parts of it, so that's the lion's share of their work. So I think they thought it was not, it would make sense if you're doing that amount of work to just go ahead and do a complete survey of the entire beach twice a year.
I got a comment. Does it make sense to consider something instead of the 8-year period, to consider more of a 6 to 10-year period and to study it and make a decision maybe 4 years in? Because we're in an ever-changing time and I'm just worried about locking a particular time period.
I think maybe it needs to be a separate bullet point, but we talked about, 3 years after a project, initiate permitting so that by 5 years after the project, you have a permit in hand that's good for 5 years. So then really you have that window to evaluate, when you actually implemented. The 8 years was more for trying to build a fund so that you're at least close to the pay for the project, if you need to flex.
Gives you flexibility.
Yeah, have some flexibility, so.
So we'll add, I think that's a good add to this document that we will apply for permits 3 years after a major project so that we can, again, the goal here is that we have everything in hand when we need it. So permitting is obviously key. So we'll add probably a new
I think that's a good bullet.
New
to add
number
and
5 or
document.
6
Yeah.
that will initiate the permitting after 3 years. Number 6 and 7 are both dealing with triggers. Again, we would like to be able to kind of analyze the new reports twice a year, see if either of these triggers are met. When a trigger is met, we'd come to city council. The first one is for a mid-size project, so this would be kind of shoal management, sand recycling, we've called it. And the trigger there is when the forecasting shows that 1,500 linear feet of the beach is projected to be below the minimum healthy beach volume within the next 12 months. So if we see a trend and we think 1,500 feet is going to be below that line, that would trigger the staff to go to council and suggest and kind of start to line up a mid-scale program. Everybody good with that? Next one is large scale, and it's the same kind of idea. We're looking at that line versus the forecasting, and the trigger here would be when a mile or more of the beach is expected to be below the minimum healthy beach volume within the next 12 months. I think we kind of analyzed these and came to the conclusion about these triggers based on kind of what we're doing now. I mean, we think we know we're within 1,500 linear feet of needing a project at the north end. I think we're kind of there also on the south end, but we obviously don't, this Army Corps project is changing our course of action there, but same thing with the large-scale project. We think within a year of that project we're going to have at least a mile below that line.
That's a question, Douglas. I think these are all great, kind of the high-level strategic 6 months intervals from a year interval and everything. I thought at one point we talked about how do we address the intervals that are sort of less than the 6 months? I mean, we're kind of in that situation now. And we talked about providing, you and administration sort of a playbook, more of a tactical than this strategic sort of plan.
Kind of emergency work?
Yeah, exactly. What happens so that, we keep getting around the table and talking about the Band-Aids. And for us to get into that proactive mode, I'd like to see a section in this document that allows you and the administration to kind of act upon more tactical emergency triggers as well, so that we're not having to, call meetings and authorize, you know what I mean? Yeah,
So
we're
that's-
always having to make it up as we go along, it seems.
That's number 11 in the hit sheet here is what we also would hope is that there would be kind of some guidance from this group as to what you think is an appropriate, what we call emergency response strategies. So we have the big scale, we have the kind of mid scale, and then we should kind of cover these emergency situations and,
So these would be the interval things?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
yeah, what the city kind of philosophy should be on those emergency situations. So that gets so number 8 is we could probably spend another month on number 8, but I think we wanted to just go over in a high level. We've been analyzing our beach preservation fund. There's a lot of assumptions that we're having to make to kind of forecast what the needs are here. And Desiree, you want to
Sure.
kind of talk about that?
Yes, we're working on a capital planning model that shows the beach preservation fee fund over 32 years and try to overlap that with this proposal that the committee has been discussing of a large project every 8 years on both inlets of the island. And it really is a very simple math exercise. You look at a 32-year plan, that's about $200 million worth of cost. Our beach preservation fee fund generates about $1.5 million every year, but that's just revenue. We net out about $700,000 to $900,000 a year. So that you're looking at an $80 to $90 million gap over 32 years. So that is a huge gap, and I think that we're looking at it just from the beach preservation fee fund, but we have to look at that from a global perspective. How does that play out in the city's total budget? I mean, we have a capital projects, we have other projects and other needs, including drainage, sewering the island, that also have massive price tags as well. So I think we're at a point where we'll be recommending to council engaging our financial advisor in a more direct way to look at what that looks like over 32 years, not only from the beach preservation fund, but general, the entire city budget and the entire city capital plan.
Because, I'm sorry, you said it was a $200 million over 32 years?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and then we're netting 900 out of the fund just strictly for beach renourishment.
Total.
Okay, so that means, say, 32 million out of it, so we're 170 short then, or 168 short. Is that what I'm hearing?
No, we're, and I don't have it in front of me, but we are looking at a gap of about 90 million.
Okay.
How much of that is dissipated by the contribution from Wild Dunes?
So that model is based on, one of the assumptions that is included is that Wild Dunes would cover 75% of the total cost of the large projects on the north end. And that is a big assumption that, we would like for this committee to evaluate. The 25% cost of the shore management project is the assumption that we use to build our current budget for the shore management project. I think that is based on the city's contribution in the past, which has been between 14 and 16% on previous projects, mainly due to the fact that we had received grant funding from the state and from FEMA after 2 hurricanes. But one big assumption that is included in this very initial draft of this model is no state or federal funding. Which, you look at communities like Dare County, they build their model based on no state and federal just because of how inconsistent that support has been. But that is one assumption that's built into the model that we're looking at, that there's no state or federal funds, and a cost increase of about 3% every year for the project and about 2% increase in revenue in our forecast. So we'll refine that and share that with the group. But yeah, we're looking at about $2 to $4 million gap every year that we would need to make up in order to effectuate this 8-year plan
So
on
just-
both ends of the
Just to make sure I
island.
got it then. So the numbers you've given include the contribution historically that's been given by Wild Dunes?
Yes, sir.
does not include anything for any kind of tax increase.
No, sir.
Doesn't include anything for any kind of citizens' contributions.
Correct. That is
Or
just,
state or federal or.
Right.
no, I mean,
Anything, it's just we're
worst
solely
case.
on our own at that
Yeah.
point.
correct,
Okay.
which shows just the math doesn't math.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, there is a huge gap that needs to be
We're
addressed.
creating a baseline assessment of where we are right now with the revenues that we create
Correct.
today, and then figuring out what that shortfall is, so that we can determine how we correct that. Or
Correct.
fix it, or make a choice to cut something else out.
And then you've included into it the analysis for the expected increase in costs for the renourishments over the years, as well as an analysis for the increased revenue over years as property values go up.
Correct. So just a 2% increase in revenue and 3% for the cost. That's sort of what our first draft is based on.
Yeah, I think it's not property value so much as it is a tax revenue.
Correct. It's not property values. It's just correct. The 1% of beach preservation fee fund that is collected on all heads and beds on the island.
So just a question for those who aren't as informed. Is there another major project or issue the city is facing that is also looking at this moment for funds? In other words, I'd love to just, shout out, hey, let's do this. But we should be looking, obviously, as a city at what the overall, so is there anything besides, in addition to the beach renourishment, that where you all are having discussions of something in the future, so that as we look forward, it's like, yeah, that's a great idea, but, we would be 50% of that, or we should,
You're talking about other projects that might be competing for the same capital?
correct. So in
In
other words, I don't want to be
total
talking in a
budget
vacuum
context.
as
No,
we're
absolutely.
throwing things out and saying, oh, yeah, raise the taxes, right.
There
But
are
we have
several,
other,
yeah.
right. Is there anything else that this group should know about?
You mean that would be eligible for the beach renourishment funds?
No, that's
No.
competing as far as, like, if you raise taxes or
I mean, Desiree
you.
just ran through a couple of them. So
Yeah.
drainage, we have $50
Drainage.
million worth of projects on the shelf based on our last island-wide drainage analysis. 50 million, which is an old number for sewering the islands. I mean, there's some, those are probably the two other big-ticket items.
And again, it's just-
Tactically, we got the waterway project that we're looking at maybe modifying that might increase. We're looking at new city hall that we're talking, $7 to $10 million. We got a bunch of projects like that, and
We have several, our fire trucks that are slated to be replaced in the next 5 to 10 years. We also have the garbage trucks for the Public Works Department that are also scheduled to be replaced in the next few years.
and employee retention.
Employee, I mean, all of the, just keeping lights on, that's just a cost that
Right.
continues to go up, and, we have recurring needs from that perspective. But if you're looking at large-scale projects, I would say, I would identify the drainage, our comprehensive master plan for drainage and sewering expanding sewer on the island, which is not, just in full disclosure, it wouldn't necessarily be an IOP or City of Isle of Palm specific expense. The Water and Sewer Commission would be involved in that, but ultimately, those costs are paid for by the property and the taxpayer. But I would say those two projects would be the largest.
It's just helpful, because I don't
Yeah.
want to ever spit anything out and think, have any of y'all think I'm thinking this is the only project on y'all's plate, so that's helpful. So it would seem whatever we do,
Act.
we need to tag for this specifically, because that, one, there'll always be competition, but also be aware that there's other
Always.
needs.
Always others, yeah.
Align the revenue stream to the,
Correct. So, I mean, I think we'll be, hopefully council embraces a proposal to work with our financial advisor on a comprehensive capital planning model that looks at all of our revenue sources. Again, to your point, not looking at the beach preservation as a standalone item, but how does that play out into the entire city plan for the next 20, 30 years? And what are our options? Is it financing? Is it revenue? How do we raise revenue? And ultimately, how do we prioritize? So I think, at a broader level, that needs to happen. But we are looking, just for this particular project, at this cadence of work, we are looking at about $3 to $4 million shortfall every year.
To build the reserves.
To
and
build the
have
reserves
money ready.
and be able to pay for the project. And again, is built on a series of assumptions that I would like to get some buy-in from the group. to make sure, are we anticipating the right things? Are we not? Are we missing anything? And I think the biggest part of this will be the contribution, the private contributions. I don't think the city has, the city does not have a set policy on how to share the revenues from the Beach Preservation Fund between the city and Waldoons. And we know that Waldoons generally generates about half of the revenues that are collected with the Beach Preservation Fee Fund. So nothing, without any other additional sources of revenue, how do we have a fair distribution of that fund along in our community?
Does it make
how
sense to
does-
meet with them and try
Yeah.
to lock something in? Create a long-term goal or a long-term contract with them?
Who do you need in the room to do that? Because it seems like this
Yeah.
is something we should
Well,
be
wasn't the 25%
encouraging.
was based on FEMA and state contributions, which we don't have any, the state fund is dry, so we can't count on that.
Correct. And this would be a good conversation for this group to have with the Waldoons Community Association and understand their source of funding. They have implemented a real estate transfer fee a few years ago dedicated to collect money towards these projects, understanding that they're not eligible for state and federal, not the entire Waldoons, if you will.
Last time I checked, they had like $7 or $8 million set aside for it, but that could change tomorrow without an agreement,
Correct.
so.
So that would be the group that the city would need to develop and agree on a policy of cost share for the future.
So I would encourage that as a step forward. Obviously, you all are the people who would choose who should be in the room for that conversation, whether it's this committee or whether it's but I think that the timing is. And the other question that I had is, when do we, putting the cost aside for the moment, when do we initiate this first beach renourishment? In other words, is it something that we plan to do in 2026? And if so, we can calculate the cost and then start to figure out how to make that, how to get the funds for that, as well as, and I think these need to be conversations that are occurring at the same time as meeting with the financial planner. But I think they'll want to know that, like, when do you actually want to pull the trigger and start? Because we know there'll be permits. And we doing a great job now being able to estimate what that cost will be. And in order to market that, to go out and sell this story, what we need to be able to,
And I think that's
say
what.
that that's our.
That's what year 0 assumes in the total cost of that 32-year plan. The city did contract CSC last year to begin the permitting process for the large-scale projects. So that's underway. Based on historical cadence, we were anticipating a project in FY '28, and that would be the 10-year, sort of the 10-year timeline for those projects. We've done 2 in the past. So that's what we're planning on and what we started working on last year towards. If we get the permits earlier and we have the opportunity to pull the trigger in FY '27 rather than FY '28, we'll have that flexibility. But that's what we have happening currently.
So with that in mind, my last question, I'm sorry, is if we're planning to pull a trigger in '28 and we're in uncharted water now, are we legitimately too far out in our thought of when this is going to happen? Meaning, are we going to be in a really bad shape by '28? Meaning, do we need to be thinking about maybe this is better after hurricane season? But we may need to be looking at this being sooner than later because we're just in uncharted water. I just don't know.
Well, you've got the Army Corps project coming, you've got a
You've
shoal
got that
management
coming and the
project
shoal
coming. So, I
management.
mean, that's a huge amount of sand that's going
Okay.
to be dumped on this island.
Yes.
That's going to hopefully get us to 28.
And again, we won't know till after the Army what
Correct.
this looks like and how the dune system built.
That's right.
So it may be a reevaluation in 6 months from now or 8 months or,
Correct.
again, I just point that out. But it's good to have a target so that as you talk to them, you can say that our goal is to, okay, thank you.
Getting back to item 8,
Wow.
with the funding and the model you have, is there any way we can look at that model? And are you looking for ideas from us as a committee for how to achieve and cover that shortfall.
Correct.
Right, and how we balance it across all the stakeholders involved, because there's obviously more than just the residents or the short-term rentals that create the revenue and are attracted by the beach and everything outside off the shores of this island. Because obviously, we need to find a way to get revenue from outside sources that we create internally, if that makes sense. But you want those ideas, but can we look at the model so that way we can look at how that works and see, so we can say, all right, if I throw this idea out, how much does this line item create? How much does this line item create to accomplish that?
That'd be a great agenda for maybe the next meeting.
Yeah, to see whatever you started with.
Correct.
So that way we can-
If we change those assumptions and we get, X amount of money from the state, how does that play out? If we plug in, an additional tax, how would that look? And,
Yeah.
yes, I think that that's really what should be driving the next conversation is
Okay.
what options do we have available today at the local level for us? What levers can we still pull? What options or ideas we can come up to request permission from the state? I mean, what would require us being allowed to levy additional tax dollars? I think we've talked about an additional accommodation tax. What would that look like? But I think we have to, the next piece of this puzzle is identify what options we have currently that our local council can decide on and act on, and what other ideas would require additional level of approval.
Yeah, what I'm really looking at is like to try and balance, because I mean, when my neighbors ask me about this and running this committee and what we're trying to do, and they hear some of these numbers, that concerns them, and it's like, how much is coming out of my pocket for this, and how do we balance that? Because there's going to be obviously pushback, and understandably so, right? Because it's a big cost, and
To your point, Andrew, I think if we go down the list and identify revenue possibilities generated on the island by other sources that are coming to the island, off-island resources, we start bucketizing these in the different tiers of where is the ultimate source of these revenues. I think we can get creative, and, we can't put the burden of it all on the backs of the
exactly.
residents.
I want to see a balance,
That's
let's
where
work
most of it
towards.
is right now, I think.
Exactly.
We want to find,
Yes.
work towards that balance, right?
Exactly, yeah.
And not everybody's going to be happy, but we can make the best solution possible.
Well, let me
Right.
clarify, currently, the beach preservation fee fund is generated by people who stay on the island,
Yeah,
not taxpayer.
100%.
yeah.
Correct.
It's created by night, right? It's a percentage of whatever the lodging fee is.
Correct.
Right? So it's in addition to
1%.
whatever they're paying the homeowner.
Correct.
And I think one of the things that we may find is that it's also looking, as we talk to our neighbors, is, we look at things like stormwater management, or, whether that's a $50 million project. And the island, I believe, values its beach as much as it values our sewer and our water. I mean, there's a large value to the people who are living here, and I think that we need to impress that as you look at all the costs that the city, that this isn't this, way out there compared to what we pay for other things that are being done on the island. It's just one that maybe we haven't needed to do before, and that's what's hard to swallow, is it's a new expense. And, it may be that if we are getting the revenue we have from our tourists, that considering a tax, people hate the word tax, but a tax on our residents that's reasonable, that's spread out, or however if that would be possibly the first time that was done for beach preservation. So there, again, it'd be a great conversation, but I do think we are going to need to look at how we see the beach. Is it something that we all value? And if so, we need to elevate it in our conversations, because it's fearful.
I
but-
absolutely understand, but I also look at the fact that,
Yeah, 'cause-
or we talk about, we tax the tourism that comes and stays on the island,
Mm-hmm.
but we obviously have adjacent communities that are creating revenue from tourism from this
Absolutely.
beach,
Right.
but we can't collect that revenue.
We've got to
So
get
how do we-
creative about how
do
to,
we capture
How do we
that?
force it?
How do we
aspect?
do that?
That's what I'm talking about. When I talk about
Yeah.
stakeholders, that's a stakeholder. The growth of the area has created
Mm-hmm.
more stakeholders. I mean, Mount Pleasant was 42,000 in 2010, and now it's over 90 to
Mm-hmm.
going towards 100,000. That's a lot of extra people that came here for a reason.
Yeah.
Right? But they're a stakeholder in this too, and we're not seeing the state revenue, so how do we collect the revenue from that? But being balanced about it, because we can't be egregious and go, well, we're gonna put it all over here and not take any from here. Like, how, that's what I'm talking about, like, when we look at this budget and look at these items, how do we accomplish that? Everyone's gonna feel a little bit of pain, how do we balance that pain? I hate, that's the best way I can put it. That's how it works, that's just how it works.
You know, it's a challenge. I mean, to say it lightly, and I feel like, you know, we kind of hear at these beach advocates meetings, the need for, you know, and they've been 10 years in existence, almost solely trying to create a state budget, you know, provision that provides state money towards the beaches. It's a unified front, all communities, all mayors, all councils, well-staffed, tied in with the senators, tied in with the Congress, tied in with the governor, and it just cannot, it can't take hold. And it doesn't seem any closer to taking hold now at the state level anyway. And the rest of it is just so kind of unpredictable. So from our standpoint, to be trying to build, you know, a budget and a savings account that's at the right size at the right time seems undoable if our solution is gonna be, we're gonna go outside. You know, we're gonna try to get it from the state, we're gonna try to get it from the feds, we're gonna try to get it from the county. For whatever reason, and, you know, we can certainly try different sales techniques, but
No, I'm not saying that I expect money to come, I'm talking about using local levers, how do we create it from the use of this island? How do we collect that revenue from when people come here? Like I'm not looking from the state, I'm not looking from the county. I have no expectations of any money coming from anywhere else other than what we can control within this structure of government. So no, when I'm looking at these levers, I'm looking at like, all right, who are the stakeholders and how do I find a fee for use? If that makes sense. And balance and say, I'm paying a fee too. Like, recognize that as a resident, I am paying into it. There's no such thing as free parking. Let's not kid ourselves about this. We pay for parking too. It's just in a different way. And how do we achieve that to say, as residents, we've invested this part and we're asking as a fee for use, whatever, however you want to look at it, or an impact fee on short-term rental licenses. Like, I don't want to get into all ideas because we want to look at what do we really have.
But we need that list of ideas.
Let's start going through, hey, all right, if we pull revenue from here, here, and here, these are actions we can take within the island, the structure of what we have. This will create and cover that shortfall. Or if we can't cover the shortfall, what do we need to trim from our ideas? Because, I mean, that's the next part of the balancing, right? Is to say, all right, this is our dream, this is what we want to do, and maybe we can't get all the way there.
And the other thing to consider as we look at the city's whole budget are items such as, super important item, the police force. Maybe there's other avenues for support of funding something like security. You see, and then that opens up a little more for other things. So there may be some areas where you're like, well, gosh, we really haven't looked at this, but maybe we have a better shot at getting state funding for something else, which opens up a little more for this. Again, I don't know if that's even feasible. I have a feeling you all know everything and have tried every avenue to, you know, squeeze every lemon, but I throw that out, that there is, you know, if we are getting nowhere right now with the politicians we have, now, and again, we can all be hopeful that something will, you know, there'll be a change in the values in the future. But there may be another, you know, whether it's garbage disposal or something where we're like, sure, there's not state funding for that, but, you know. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, so many people enjoy, you know, I was in the city center this weekend, and you just see how many people are loving to come to our beach. And they're coming from everywhere. You see the license plates. They're coming from everywhere, and they're, you know, one, we want it to be something they enjoy, but two,
There's a cost.
there's unfortunately, we're a small island, and we're at a point where there's a cost.
Yeah.
so is that, are you all thinking that's next meeting? Kind of put all ideas
Yeah, because you've
out
got, on the expense side in your packet, kind of the next to last page is the output of the assumptions. That doesn't hit the revenue side, that's just the cost side of an 8 or 10-year cycle.
I think
So-
a
And
And are we
comprehensive
ready
list
to,
of.
I mean, are y'all ready to share the assumptions that go into this at our next meeting, maybe?
Yes.
Okay.
And a
I mean, you
list
got
of.
two sides,
yeah.
obviously, I mean, the revenue and the expense side of this. so.
And we can talk, I mean, we've prepared in the past for council during the budget process, options that are available for increasing revenue. We can bring that up and we can have a conversation about just additional options in terms of,
Then we can start like trying to add line items and say, hey, if we have this idea, what budget, what revenue can we create from it? Obviously, what's the cost to implement it? Because we can say it's a gross revenue of this, but obviously there's going to be an operating cost, so it's going to erode at it, right? What's our profit, if you will, to then put towards the next project, you know, and, because it's going to go right back out.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful to really have it's almost a brainstorming session. We know where all of our current revenue streams are. There may be new revenue streams, but I picture it as let's stuff the top of the funnel of opportunities where we can go after money and where they're going to be originating from so that we know what challenge we might be up against and see what comes out the bottom of it from a council and approval standpoint. But we gotta have I think an exhaustive list of possibilities, whether they come to fruition or not. Maybe a lot of them don't. Most of them they may not. But we've got to stuff that funnel.
Yeah.
So maybe we very narrowly have our next meetings around revenue. I mean, the expense side kind of.
And the model. Let's go through the model.
Yeah, like, we found the expensing, right? By creating the ideal beach model. So now let's figure out how do we pay for it?
If it's 3 to 4 a year, whatever, then that's our target in the context of everything else.
So I think that's a good, we'll revisit number 8 on our hit list. These others we can kind of go through pretty quickly. Well, I think number 11 will take time, and maybe we'll do that at a future meeting. But in your packet, and the staff and Stephen met and discussed a question that came out of this committee about what changes could happen at Wild Dunes that would open them up to more public funding. And I'm not sure the pages.
It was the last 2 pages, I think, yeah.
But we think it's, I guess we kind of knew it would be a series of locations to provide access through the gate and then a parking space, that each access in 5 spaces gets a 1/8 of a mile? Each
6
direct-
spaces.
6 spaces.
Yeah.
So you can
6
see the
parking
kind of.
spaces. 6 parking spaces.
6 parking spaces. And the circles on that attachment are a diameter of a 1/4 mile. Those are
Those
quarter,
are diameter of a 1/4 mile.
Diameter of a
Radius
1/4 mile. and you can see a lot of them, you can kind of pick and choose a handful of those. You don't need all of them because they're overlapping. But we think that if the Wild Dunes community was agreeable to allowing, kind of strategically choose these spaces, allow cars to come through, allow 6 parking spaces at kind of strategic spots along the way, we do think that would qualify as public beach and then be, available.
What's the total number, Douglas?
Well, it kind of depends on how it's done. So if you put 25 cars at the Wild Dunes Property Owners Beach House, which isn't possible, but if it was, that would give you a 1/2 mile in either direction and come close to covering the entire area.
25 spots.
25
Yes, sir.
spots. And I think with one other spot that would hold 6, in theory, you could have 31 cars and it would pretty much open up that entire east end. But in its current state, I don't think that 25 cars could fit in that access. So the other criteria are 6 spaces gives you an 1/8 of a mile, 10 spaces gives you a 1/4 mile from an access point in either direction. So a 1/4 mile north, 1/4 mile south. So what this terrible graphic shows is, dots centered on somewhat major access points within the different regimes and within Wild Dunes at the minimum criteria. So in theory, an access that's just there south of the beach club on the east side of Dunecrest Lane, if you could find 3 spaces in the Dunecrest area and 3 spaces on that southern beach club area, that's 6 spaces that could apply for that access and give you an 1/8 mile beach in either direction from that. So if you could get very creative with, 3 spaces, 4 spaces here, 2 spaces, 3 spaces there, between the different regimes and condos, or if one condo had, 6 spaces that could be designated as, hey, these are just going to be public spaces. They could have some type of online, reservation system for a reasonable fee that would allow people to reserve that space, get access through the gate, to park there, to access the beach. In theory, that could be public access. Now, this would take agreement from OCRM, BCM, and Wild Dunes, but, if there was a space that you could fit 10, then you double the size of the circle around that dot, because you're getting a 1/4 mile instead of an 1/8 mile. So we could show this in a lot of different ways, but the stations that are shown there, the lines are 200 feet apart, so you can kind of get a ruler out and do some measuring to see what different scenarios could happen, but there's not an easy way just to show, hey, this is the perfect scenario.
So maybe the conversation with Wild Dunes is for 30, 35, whatever the number of spaces. It doesn't sound to, may not be a large number, but the potential funding opportunity for public, if we go down the Army Corps, or what other state funding or federal funding if it comes. I think the economics on a per space per year would be fairly overwhelming, but I think it's up to Wild Dunes. I don't know, Dan, do you have any insights or thoughts
I'm not
on
really
it?
necessarily sold on the Army Corps doing it. I'm not saying I'm not sold on it. I just haven't looked enough into it. But I think it certainly deserves a conversation with Wild Dunes. They can be much more creative with their land than we can be. And at least let them look at it, because their contribution is giant. Anyhow, for the monies they're bringing in, and with the long-term estimations that we have as far as, continued beach renourishment, if we had federal funding, it's something worth at least talking to them about.
This seems like a pretty low impact to the community. You're talking about 30 spaces,
Well, it's just
for a large gain.
And it would apply also for state funding, so state and federal.
And FEMA, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Oh, that's
both.
FEMA.
Those,
Huge.
That's the big one.
those requirements that Stephen spelled out about number of parking spaces gives you a 1/4, 1/8, or 1/2 of a mile. That's included in the state regulations and the state budget, state law. And FEMA uses that same definition to qualify whether or not, to determine whether or not an area qualifies for public access.
I don't know if it makes sense to invite someone from Wild Dunes here for a meeting, or just to have somebody speak to them.
I
At least
think
put
it's a
the bug in the
sidebar.
ear.
Yeah,
Talk
I
to
think it's an
Jim, yeah.
off-site conversation, personally.
At least try and see if
Yeah.
it makes sense.
So
I think-
am I hearing it right, that, again, not being as informed on this, is if this occurred, then in the event of a hurricane, tropical storm, anything that FEMA declares, then they would get funding or help renourishing
Just
their
like-
beach
just
as
like
well,
ours,
which
yeah.
would mean they wouldn't have to go into their fund to do that. Otherwise, they're looking at their millions of dollars after a tropical storm to,
And
is that
the city
correct?
funds.
And the city funds, that's a
So
that's
we
a
do
huge
that-
savings on
Well,
our beach renourishment.
I do want to
Okay, so-
clarify, right now, they are actually eligible for FEMA Category G restoration, because the city of
Okay.
Isle of Palms is an eligible applicant, and it's the city's project. So even though it's on a quote
Okay.
private beach,
Okay,
it is eligible for FEMA restoration, so if.
For
and we've
emergency,
been su-
correct.
Yeah, we've been successful with that, so if we have a major storm and that
Okay.
east end loses 200,000 yards of sand, then 200,000 yards of sand are eligible.
Yeah, we're
Okay.
required to have once if it's an engineered beach, you qualify for emergency FEMA funds after a storm.
Okay.
And because we have done projects and we survey, that portion of the beach is considered an engineered beach, we have received FEMA funding. And that's why in 2018, the city received almost $6 million in total FEMA funds.
It-
Okay.
If this
And-
was a
and
Wild
state.
Dunes project and it was the Wild Dunes Community Association sponsoring it and permitting it, then it would not be eligible.
Correct.
And
Okay.
that doesn't make any sense, but that's the way it is.
But they would be, I guess, to your, following
What
your
would they
train of
gain?
thought.
I guess is what would we gain if they had?
I think that's the hard part of their, kind of the same conversation we're having on the south end. In exchange for those 30 or 40 spaces, what will they get from FEMA or the state? I don't know that we know.
Okay.
If there was
Quantify
a
that
dedicated
exactly.
funding source from the state that you knew that the state was going to contribute, then it would be a huge
Slam
benefit.
dunk.
Because
Okay.
the volume of sand within the private area is, 75% of, excluding the south end now, of the work up at the east end. So you think half of that quantity would be eligible, or half the cost of that would be eligible for state match.
Okay.
And there's still the issue of the rules under the Army Corps that you have to have everybody sign off on it on Front Beach, which makes it terribly difficult
But
to
that,
accomplish anyhow.
that group, Wild Dunes has given, they all have given an easement. It's been to the city, and it would be a different easement to the federal government, but all of those property owners have given an easement for beach renourishment.
But would the Army Corps accept a project just on the north end and not do the south end also?
Well, I think that we would investigate we've asked for the Army Corps to investigate the south end. I mean, I think if there was a willingness to open this end up, we would also ask for them to investigate the north end.
Right now, it's not eligible because it doesn't meet the public access requirement. Therefore,
Right.
they're not studying that, because even if they can justify a cost-benefit analysis ratio that's positive for them, because it doesn't meet the public access, it would not be eligible. But if that changes, I guess
Understood.
that they would evaluate it.
One of the concerns that we discussed at another meeting was about the south end. If everybody doesn't agree to the easement, it would never go through. And then, therefore, the question was, what if Wild Dunes says, yeah, we'll do it. We'll make it open access. We'll agree to all these. Could the Army Corps just do the north end?
I mean,
I don't
think
know,
it's good,
but
yeah. I mean, I think it's possible.
It's
where there's-
possible that
yeah,
if it meets their CBA threshold.
yeah. And I think, Dan, to your point, we've still got some work to do on the Army Corps. We launched the first shot across the bow to them to include it, for an analysis.
And
But
it's
we,
7 or 8 years out anyhow.
but we have work to
Yeah.
do to say, is this something we want to do as an island? Because there are some hurdles without a doubt.
So that would fall into as you talked about, the large deficit with the 30 years of management. We should also, if we don't know that, what the 10-year out is, because there is a possibility that we aren't able to
Yeah.
do it in perpetuity, but if it's a 10-year out and we know we need 15 million, then that may be, we should at least be aiming to survive the storms of the next 10 years with a well-nourished beach and find that funding. And, which, again, we've got a lot of uncertainty, I know.
Go ahead,
So-
Douglas.
On the Wild Dunes piece, are you saying that we think just aside, somebody approach?
That would be, I wouldn't pull them into a
Yeah.
video room to have this conversation.
Well, Douglas and I, we meet monthly
I
with the
know, yeah.
WDCA COO, and we have a meeting this afternoon with him. And at our last meeting, we did inquire and formally ask them to evaluate whether or not this is something that the board would entertain. I know the question has been asked in the past when we're designing projects, and we communicated that this was a question that this committee had inquired about and was curious about. So we have already requested them to discuss amongst themselves whether it would be something that they would be able to embrace, pull off, whether they think it's feasible or not. So we'll wait to see what they report back.
And it could impact our financial assumptions. I think it's a key financial assumption for the whole island, so that, I think that answer is going to be critical from Wild Dunes, whether it's worth entertaining or not.
Yeah, and I think Douglas, once you all have the conversations, we can certainly bring them into this committee to have some further discussion about what it means to our overall model, what it means to the overall island. But I think this initial conversation y'all have already started, so.
Yeah, and
It's a much smaller number than I had thought it was going to be, to tell you.
the number of
That's my initial
cars.
reaction. 30 spots was a lot less than.
I don't know if that,
Gotcha.
whole different conversation, but if that few cars enters into the cost-benefit analysis from an Army Corps perspective? I mean, I know that they run a million models in terms of how much does the public benefit. I'm assuming that that model would somehow catch
Would be
that it's a very
similar.
small amount, the public availability is limited, so I'm guessing that has a counterbalancing score on their cost-benefit analysis, but I don't know that.
I don't know that it does. I think if it's a
It is
public
public is
beach,
public.
then all of a sudden now they're looking at, okay, you got a 52-unit condo building that could be damaged by a storm. So like Ocean Club would immediately bump up their cost benefit
So you're
ratio.
thinking it's kind of binary, it's either public or it's not, and,
From my understanding, it is.
okay.
That makes
And I
sense.
thought the Army Corps, when they were here, were pretty willing to make the beach access work. They seem to be wanting to have already examined Wild Dunes and their parking situation, because I thought she came out literally with these 3 accesses would cover it. Like, I thought she literally had already analyzed this, so it didn't seem like it was that egregious, but it'd be good to maybe look at that old video to see
Yeah.
what she said on that in the conversation, because obviously they only I'd only want to do this once if I was a community. If they're going to do it, make sure they do it so it meets all the,
And I
or at
think
least have
she
that
was-
knowledge.
She was probably looking at the largest gain from that classification.
Yes.
If you do, more parking spaces and less access paths, it would give you a larger. But knowing the reality of the amount of space available, we were looking at, okay, if you take it in smaller chunks, that may be more feasible from their perspective. But I think that that's what she was referring to,
Okay.
looking at the property owner's beach house, because it has a large parking lot.
Yep. I think she was just talking about 2 accesses, yeah.
Yeah, so that would be a large parking lot at 2 versus maybe 6
Scattered.
6-car
Scattered, yeah.
parking lots.
across
It's
the-
kind of different way to get there too. And we also have for them to talk about kind of a commitment on the 75% match going forward, so we'll add that too. Do we want to, so next on our hit list, analyzing Army Corps pros and cons, and then also developing emergency response strategies, kind of the short term. We don't have anything prepared for those, but we just have them in here as a
Yeah.
placeholder. Any thoughts as to what would be helpful to you all to kind of start?
I think on the Army Corps,
fleshing
we
those
need,
out?
let's get past this next issue with Wild Dunes, and it makes more sense to kind of, because otherwise the pros and cons are going to change completely if there was an interest in it.
So get through the public access question with them.
I think so.
Before we analyze that one. Put that one, keep that one kind of on hold.
Yeah, maybe just document the kind of the condition precedent here on what we're gonna need in order to get it.
Yeah.
Get that, we need the decision or position from Wild Dunes on what they're willing to do.
And then emergency response strategies. This could also be, as you all know, this could be a novel unto
Yeah.
itself in terms, and kind of what we were, I think what the city staff would be, things that have kind of bounced around from our perspective is, this most recent episode on the south end was the first time the city ever funded emergency response except for right after a storm. I mean, historically, a storm happens, and it's typically been a FEMA-funded operation of building a dune. And we've heard pros and cons. Should council have made that move to fund that, especially given the kind of state of financial affairs that fund, we kind of know that fund is going to be undersized for major projects. So should the city be in the business of doing that type of work? Or should that be borne by the individual property owners? It's a question. The question about seawalls, I think you all know that the city's kind of bounced around a policy there. Does this group want to kind of wade into making a recommendation to council on that? Kind of anything else that would be a short term, again, this is monopolize the city's time,
Would it be
finances.
too much to ask to have you maybe take it offline and come back with, what are the 5 or 6 questions that you all need answered in order to react or act in a proactive way, as opposed to having to come to council or whatever to ask, instead of the ask permission, it's you're going to get pre-approved to be proactive when you hit something like, when a dune is eroded by a certain amount, this is what we want to do, and then the question on the decision tree, is it going to be on the resident or is it going to be on the city?
Yeah, I don't know that we could get the decision. I don't know that the staff could ever do any type of project without specifically getting council's.
No, that's what
approval on
I'm asking. If you can give us what you need, questions answered or things to be approved, that gets you into the proactive, if you can get that criteria, then council approves that criteria, and then you're a go. You don't have to keep coming back on every individual.
I think that's the point of what you just said. I mean, we have to establish a policy in an emergency situation. What is the city expect the city to do?
Yeah.
Recognizing that we have finite funds, we have a huge shortfall and a huge gap for larger projects. Another assumption, this is not, that we talked about the $80-90 million gap, that doesn't include any emergency work. And rightfully so, if we have a more frequent program for beach renourishment, we hope that we would not be in an emergency situation, but I don't think we can count on that. Just because of how dynamic and how quickly things can change. We may still be doing projects in 8 years and have an emergency situation in year 6. Is the expectation that the city would be jumping in at year 6 and funding emergency protective measures at that point? Or should that be something that, property owners would be responsible to do, and the city comes in at year 8 or year X with a large project? That is not, I don't think that is a decision point for the staff to make. I think it's a sort of an overarching policy that we know, property owners know, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and anything else off of that is going to be on the property owner, if that's the way we want to go. But I think that is an important question that needs to be answered and included in whatever policy this group recommends.
So you want like defined tasks that the city's allowed to do, take action on, and do you want like a cap on the budget? Where it's like, if it's these 5 items, we can do this, up to, call it $200,000, and after that, at 201 or 200,001 cent, then it requires council's approval.
Correct.
Kind of like a normal other government entities that have an O&M budget, so when certain things happen to a structure or building, they execute that plan up to that threshold.
Correct.
Then once it's crossed.
But I think every
Aspiration.
scenario has city council. I mean, it's always going to be an expenditure that city council
Anything
has to.
over 25 has to go to.
Yeah, everything.
I mean, it would require an amendment to the code, to our procurement code, to give the city administrator that authority, but it could happen. I mean,
But that could happen, yeah.
Correct,
We could
correct.
create a code line item.
Well, it sounds like one of the big
Yes.
items is, what's the policy? When is it going to be city versus owner? That seems like a real.
Right, that I think is the
Setting
big.
What is the goal? So I think you take, for example, October 2024, 30 houses have water under their foundation. Now what do we do? Right. What is are we renourishing those, are we renourishing in November 2024 with some dune? Like that, right, what is our policy to protect the home? Or is it the point where that storm comes in and those homes are now fully exposed? Is that it? Like, is the next step, the next storm, and now it's to the, like we have to, that's where, so I think there's the policy of to help preserve the structures, and if so, then where did the triggers come in? And just like there's, and then you go to city council with your policy was, and this is what it's going to, we've gotten the, estimate of the cost. But I think that having these set points of goals and triggers is probably, not sitting in y'all's chairs, but I assume that it would be super important to.
Oh, I agree. I mean, I keep going back to our, beach management plan, that we do have a document that says what we're supposed to be doing. And, to me, that's sort of the guiding principle. I think that in practicality and in practice, we either need some more definition around what that means when we say we're going to preserve our dune and beach structure, or we need to change our policy.
Does it make sense, we talked earlier about whether or not we build more bags, or could we build more bags and have them stored somewhere, for an emergency situation? Does that make sense to consider also, the city's got a certain amount
Of the inventory?
of implementation, because the problem is that it goes back to Dare County with their comment that if you move quickly, you get a better price point. If you wait till last minute, you don't. Because if there's a big storm here, it's a big storm everywhere, all over this part of the coast. And it might make sense, and I don't know what the storage would cost. If there are facilities where you can store these things to have them transported, and you're just paying an insurance policy to have it, you own the sandbags, they're yours. Unfortunately, we know we're gonna need them eventually, until something big happens that's permanent. But at least we have something set up in place, so if the city says we've had a huge storm, these houses are in dire strait, why don't we move 100 bags over right away to protect them? And they can. Is that something that can practically be done?
I don't know that we
Does
can
anybody else do
store,
it?
you're specifically storing bags?
Well, the empty bags, is that what?
Empty bags, I
bags.
think, is what I had envisioned we could certainly do. I mean, I don't know that they would take up more than kind of a closet, but I don't think filled bags, and I don't know, I think the delay is almost always actually getting the
It's the
bag,
bag- the
not
bag
not
itself.
Not
filling it.
Was that
them,
right? Okay.
yeah.
So I think we could, well, certainly,
It's an inexpensive insurance policy, it looks like.
so,
I mean,
But
this-
then if the city could have authority to
Distribute
enact
them,
and
yeah.
distribute them for a certain amount.
Yeah,
Under
that'd be a
certain
great,
circumstances.
that'd be a great tactical.
Right, like you've
Trigger, yeah.
identified, right, in this case, let's say you've identified 5 homes.
Yeah.
The town could work forward without having to wait for the next city council meeting.
so for number 11, we will jot down kind of 5, 6, a handful of decision-making kind of policies that we think would be helpful to get your opinions on, include that on, maybe not the upcoming agenda, because it may be
Yeah, I think the
full
next
of-
one is really number 8.
Yeah,
is the
but
revenue.
one after
Good
that,
idea. Yeah.
we'll come to 11.
And when would we like to do the next one to hit on the revenue side?
When would you be
Will
ready?
you, yeah.
Like
I
to
think-
get back to Fridays if we could, but that's just
Yeah.
me.
Yeah, we've been kind of
Yeah, we can,
plugging away with Deborah on this, so
Second?
Friday, the 26th, or the
A
second?
Second. Just to give you time to flush it and,
That's good for me.
Me
Yep,
too.
That works.
Trying to see where I'm gonna be.
You're gonna be on vacation again?
No, I'm working.
I hope. I mean, that would be great.
Second. No, I'll be on layover. I can do it via remote.
okay. Desiree,
I should
does
have
that feel
good Wi-Fi.
Yeah, that works.
We'll do second at 9, or
9 a.m.
normal Friday.
got it.
Good? Good?
One question that I think I had asked before, but in terms of next meetings and presenters and people we want to hear from, I believe we wanted to have a conversation with our lobbyists. Once we flush out an understanding of what our gap is and what our options are, maybe get them here and we can talk to them about strategy of what may be more feasible at the General Assembly to support, what may not be, and give us an idea of those options that we don't have control of. What are the chances and strategies that we can implement to have a better chance at having some support? Is that something that you all would like to see? Also, we talked about the Walden's Community Association, whether or not we want to do that offline, or do we want to have a conversation with them here?
I think that's offline until there's decision point personally.
Okay,
And
And we talked, let me just say, we talked about having if we went down the path of this tax district, having an attorney here just to kind of walk us through.
what that
pros,
would look like,
cons.
yeah? Okay.
I think that would, sorry, Douglas.
And I think I'm understanding, at least Andrew's position, that the state getting funding from the broader community would not necessarily be tied into the legislature or any kind of, it's
I-
it's
yeah, I
triggers
think,
that
like-
pull on the public when they show up here,
Yeah.
they're locally collected, managed.
Managed
but full
by,
of-
yeah, completely within our own budget.
I think the key is it's locally generated revenue.
Yeah.
Streams.
Slash
That way-
controlled.
Yeah, that way no one else is exercising control of it, or we're not on hopes and prayers here.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, just being honest about it.
Yeah. All right.
Desiree, you good?
Yes, sir.
You have what you